You know, there are these hidden forces, these invisible scripts that are quietly shaping some of the biggest parts of our lives. So in this explainer, we're going to go on a mission to find them.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. That's a weird question, right? I mean, one's about the air we breathe, a huge public problem. The other? Super personal, something you and I manage every single day. But what if the way we get to the bottom of both is actually the same? Because as it turns out, both are totally influenced by these unseen drivers. Think of them as the underlying factors, kind of like the source code that dictates the final outcome. And here's the cool part. Once you learn how to spot them in one place, you start seeing them, well, everywhere. All right, to really show you what I mean, let's dive into our first case study. We're going to look at a very visible problem, a polluted city, and the hunt for its invisible causes. So, back in the winter of 2015, a team of scientists in South Korea basically went full-on detective mode. They were trying to figure out the true source of the nation's really bad smog. They gathered a ton of data from over 200 different areas to pinpoint the real culprits.
And, they started by lining up all the usual suspects. Was it just too many people crammed into one place? Maybe all the traffic from cars? Or what about the heavy industry, those big power plants? They literally measured everything to see what lined up with the worst pollution days.
So at first, the data seemed pretty cut and dry. More cars on the road? Yep, that led to more pollution. And areas with fossil fuel power plants were, no surprise here, way more likely to have bad air. Everything was pointing to a really simple answer, except for one little piece of data that just didn't fit the puzzle. And this is where the investigation got really interesting. The places using the most industrial power, they weren't the worst polluters. Get this, in the top quarter of industrial areas, the air quality actually started to get better. So more power didn't equal more pollution. What on earth was going on? And then they had this breakthrough. They realized the real driver wasn't the amount of power being used, but the type of industry using it. The true pollution hotspots weren't downtowns full of office buildings. No, it was the areas with chemical plants and car factories. It was never about quantity, it was about quality. Bam, they'd found the source code.
Okay, so this raises a really fascinating question, right? We've just seen that to understand a city's air, you have to dig deeper than the obvious stuff to find those hidden drivers. So, what if we could apply that same forensic approach to the smog in our own minds? All that confusion and the not-so-great outcomes that can cloud our financial lives?
And that brings us right to our own internal pollutants, those hidden biases that kind of contaminate our thinking, especially when money is involved. See, our brains are hardwired with these mental shortcuts. We call them cognitive biases. They evolved to help us make lightning-fast decisions to survive, like, hearing a rustle in the grass and just assuming it's a lion. Super handy on the savannah. But in the super complex world of modern finance, yeah, those same shortcuts can lead us way, way astray.
Let's take one of the big ones, loss aversion. Behavioral economists have found that for most people, the pain of losing, say $100, feels about twice as bad as the pleasure of finding $100. Our brains are just fundamentally wired to play defense and avoid losses.
Sound familiar? Come on. Have you ever held on to a losing investment, telling yourself, I'll sell it just as soon as it gets back to what I paid for it? Yeah, that's not a rational strategy. That is loss aversion talking. Doing everything it can to help you avoid the pain of actually admitting you lost.
So how do people handle these internal drivers? We're going to explore two totally different ways of thinking when it comes to managing risk. On one side, you've got the professional, analytical, data-driven, trying to manage emotions. And on the other side, the believer, who's more about faith, emotion, and using positive thinking to shape their reality.
First up, let's take a look inside the brain of the professional. We're talking about pro stock traders who manage risk for a living. So what makes them tick?
Okay, so what you're looking at is basically a scan of a professional trader's brain while they're making risky financial decisions. You can see the analytical parts lighting up for sure, but look at what's not lighting up, the fear center. It's quiet. And that, right there, is the key difference. So what is the trader's secret sauce? It's literally written in their brainwaves. They show way less activity in the amygdala. That's the brain's alarm system, the fear center that drives loss aversion. Instead, all the action is happening up in the prefrontal cortex, the logic and control tower. They've basically trained their brains to react less and think more. All right, now let's flip the coin and look at our second mindset, the believer. This approach isn't about shutting down emotion. It's about harnessing it through a belief system you've probably heard of, manifestation. So what exactly is manifestation? Well, according to a 2023 study, it's the belief that your thoughts and feelings send out these vibrations, and that a higher power, like the universe, sends back real-world experiences to match. In a nutshell, if you think and feel wealthy, you'll attract wealth.
So the same researchers decided to ask a pretty bold question. Does this belief actually line up with financial success? They surveyed hundreds of people, figured out how strongly they believed in manifestation, and then they asked about their actual financial history. And the results? Well, they were pretty surprising.
The study found a pretty startling connection. People who scored highest on the manifestation belief scale, they were almost 1.3 times more likely to say they'd been a victim of financial fraud.
And that's not all. They were also 1.42 times more likely to have declared bankruptcy at some point. Now, the researchers are quick to point out this doesn't mean positive thinking causes bad outcomes. It's more of a suggestion that a really strong belief in attracting wealth might, just maybe, take the place of the, let's be honest, less glamorous work of careful financial planning.
Okay, so let's tie this all together. We've looked for unseen drivers in a city's smog, and we've peeked inside two totally different mindsets. So what's the takeaway for you and me?
It means that just like those pollution detectives, we got to look past the surface level stuff. To really get a handle on our own financial health, it's not enough to just look at the number in our bank account. We have to find our own source code, those deep-seated biases like loss aversion, or those powerful belief systems that are quietly pulling the strings.
So we've uncovered the unseen drivers, right? From the literal air we breathe to the biases inside our own heads, we've seen the cool, analytical brain of the professional, and we've seen the real-world outcomes linked with pure belief. So now, the only question left, and it's the biggest one, is this: what's driving you?